I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I just left Laura a voicemail, a simple one, like always. Hey, just wanted to say I love you. Hope you have a great day. It was something I'd been doing for years, every morning, even on the bad days. And there had been a lot of bad days lately. Laura was still asleep next to me, her golden hair fanned out across the pillow. She looked so peaceful, so familiar, but at the same time, like someone I didn't know anymore. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand or brush the hair from her face, but something stopped me. These past few weeks, it felt like she wasn't really here. Not with me, anyway. She stirred, letting out a soft groan as she rolled onto her back and blinked at me. "Morning," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I said, forcing a smile. "Did you sleep okay?" She shrugged and yawned. "Not really. I kept waking up." "Any reason why?" I asked, careful to keep my tone casual. She shook her head, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "Just stress, I think. You know, work stuff." I nodded, pretending to believe her. "Anything I can do to help?" She glanced at me briefly, then looked away. "No, it's fine. It's just a lot right now." Her answer hit me harder than it should have. There was a time when she would have leaned on me, shared her worries, let me in. Now, it felt like she was keeping me at arm's length, and I didn't know why. She got out of bed, grabbing her phone off the nightstand. I couldn't help but notice how quickly she unlocked it, her fingers moving across the screen as she scrolled through notifications. I watched her for a moment, wondering who she was texting so early in the morning. "Coffee?" she asked, not looking up. "Yeah, sure," I said, even though my stomach was already in knots. Downstairs, the house felt quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you think something's wrong, even if nothing obvious is. I sat across from Laura at the kitchen table, picking at the toast she'd made me. She was scrolling through her phone again, sipping her coffee absent-mindedly. "You've been on your phone a lot lately," I said, trying to sound lighthearted. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said quickly, raising my hands. "I just meant you're busy. That's all." She sighed, setting her phone down a little too hard. "Andrew, I'm not doing anything shady, if that's what you're trying to say." I blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't say you were." She shook her head, her expression softening. "Sorry, I didn't mean to snap. I'm just tired." I nodded, even though her apology didn't quite feel real. "It's okay." We sat in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "Oh, by the way, Derek's hosting a party this weekend. One of his servers canceled last minute, so he asked if I could help out." "Wait, Derek asked you to waitress at his party?" I asked, frowning. "Yeah, he's paying me $200. It's not a big deal." I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of it. "Doesn't he have, like, a whole staff for that kind of thing?" She rolled her eyes. "Andrew, it's just one night." He asked, and I said yes. End of story. I nodded slowly, though my gut told me something was off. "Okay, if you're sure." "I am," she said, standing up and grabbing her empty mug. "It's easy money. What's the harm?" I didn't have an answer to that. At least, not one I could say out loud. That evening, I sat in my car outside the house, staring at my phone. I'd been debating this for weeks now, but I couldn't push it down anymore. Something wasn't right, and I needed help figuring out what. My thumb hovered over the contact I'd saved weeks ago. Claire Preston, a family lawyer. James, one of my closest friends, had recommended her after his divorce. I remembered the way he'd looked when he told me about her. Tired, defeated, like the whole thing had drained him. At the time, I'd felt sorry for him. Now, I wasn't so sure I wouldn't end up in the same position. Before I could talk myself out of it, I tapped the number. Claire Preston speaking, came a calm, professional voice on the other end. "Hi, Claire. This is Andrew Bennett," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I was wondering if I could schedule a consultation." "Of course, Mr. Bennett. What's the issue?" I hesitated, my throat dry. "I think my wife might be cheating on me." There was a pause, and then her tone softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Do you have any evidence, or is this just a suspicion?" "Just a suspicion," I admitted. But it's a strong one. Understood, she said. Let's set up a time to meet. We can go over your options and figure out the best next steps. We scheduled a meeting for the next afternoon. When I hung up, I felt like I'd crossed some invisible line. There was no going back now. That night, Laura was curled up on the couch when I came home. She smiled when she saw me, but it felt off, forced, like she was trying to convince me, and maybe herself, that everything was fine. How was work? She asked, setting her phone down. Good. We finalized that healthcare deal, I said, sitting beside her. That's great, she said, leaning her head back. I'm proud of you. Thanks, I said, studying her face. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. You okay? Yeah, just worn out, she said. The kids were a handful today. Same old, same old. I nodded, unsure what else to say. We used to talk for hours about everything. Our days, our plans, our dreams. Now, it felt like we were strangers. After a while, she stood up, stretching. I'm gonna head to bed. You coming? In a bit, I said, watching her disappear down the hall. When I was sure she was asleep, I opened my laptop and typed, "Private investigators near me." If something was going on, I needed to know. Because whatever this was, whatever we were, it wasn't working anymore. Sitting in the parking lot outside Claire Preston's office, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I hadn't even stepped out of the car yet, and I was already questioning everything. Was I doing the right thing? What if I was wrong? What if all these feelings of unease were just in my head, and I was about to blow up my marriage over nothing? But then I thought about Laura's smile, or rather, the way it had disappeared over the past few months, the way she barely looked at me anymore. The late nights, the locked phone, the scent on her clothes that didn't belong to me. I let out a shaky breath and whispered to myself, "You can't keep living like this." With that, I grabbed the door handle and stepped out of the car. Claire greeted me with a handshake, her expression calm but focused. She had the kind of presence that made you feel both safe and vulnerable at the same time. Like she could see through all the walls you'd built around yourself. "Andrew Bennett," she said, her voice steady. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to muster some confidence. "Come on in," she said, motioning me toward her office. I followed her inside, feeling the weight of every step. Her office was nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't cold or clinical. There were warm tones, soft lighting, and family photos on the walls. Probably stock images, but they still made the place feel human. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, take a seat." I sat down, trying not to fidget. My hands rested on my knees, but I kept clenching and unclenching them, the anxiety bubbling under my skin. "So, what brings you in today?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. I hesitated, my throat suddenly dry. For a moment, I thought about making up an excuse and walking out, but I forced myself to speak. "I think my wife might be cheating on me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire didn't react, not a flicker of surprise or judgment. She just nodded, her gaze steady. "I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me why you think that might be the case?" I let out a shaky breath, staring at the floor. "She's been different lately, distant. She doesn't talk to me like she used to. She's always on her phone, and she keeps it locked now. And she's had these late-night meetings that don't feel right." Claire nodded, jotting something down in a notebook. "Anything else?" I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. There was this one time. I was doing the laundry, and I noticed her clothes smelled like cologne. It wasn't mine. Saying it out loud made it feel even worse, like the weight of it all had doubled in an instant. "Have you confronted her about any of this?" Claire asked. "No," I said quickly. "I don't want to accuse her if I'm wrong. I don't want to destroy our marriage over nothing." "That's completely understandable," she said. "You're being cautious, which is good. But it's clear this is weighing on you, Andrew. Carrying this kind of doubt can be just as damaging as the truth itself." I nodded, my throat tight. I don't know what to do." Claire leaned back in her chair, her voice calm but firm. "If you want clarity, whether it's peace of mind or confirmation, you'll need evidence. That's where a private investigator comes in." "A private investigator?" I asked, frowning. Yes, she said. They can monitor her activities discreetly and gather proof if there's something to find. And if there's nothing, at least you'll have peace of mind. The idea made my stomach turn. It felt wrong, like I was crossing some invisible line. I don't know if I can do that. It feels invasive. I understand, Claire said, her tone softening. But consider this. Living in limbo isn't fair to you, or to her. Right now, you're stuck in a place of doubt and suspicion. Getting clarity is the only way to move forward. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my hands. I hated this. I hated that I was even in this position. But she was right. I couldn't keep living like this. Okay, I said finally. Do you have someone you recommend? She nodded and slid a business card across the desk. Simon Walsh. He's one of the best. Tell him I sent you. I stared at the card for a moment before slipping it into my pocket. Thank you, I said quietly. That night, I waited until Laura had gone to bed before calling Simon. I sat at the kitchen table, the card in one hand and my phone in the other, my heart pounding in my chest. This is Simon Walsh, a deep, steady voice answered. Hi, this is Andrew Bennett, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Claire Preston gave me your number. Right, he said. Claire mentioned you might call. What's going on? I hesitated, my throat dry. I think my wife might be seeing someone else, I said finally, the words feeling like a betrayal. Okay, Simon said calmly. Why do you think that? I told him everything, the late nights, the phone, the cologne. He listened without interrupting, his silence oddly comforting. When I finished, there was a pause. You've got strong instincts, he said finally. People don't usually call me unless they're picking up on something real. Do you want to move forward? Yes, I said quietly. What does that involve? We'll start with her phone, he said. I'll install a tracking app. It's completely discreet. I can also provide an audio recorder for her purse or car, if you're comfortable with that. The thought made me feel sick. Is all that really necessary? It's your call, Simon said. But if you want answers, this is the way to get them. I closed my eyes, my hands trembling. Okay, do it. 2 days later, Simon called with an update. She's clean so far, he said. No suspicious texts or calls. But that party she's working at for Derek? That'll be the real test. Why? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. People tend to slip up when they think their partner's out of town, Simon said. You're leaving for a trip, right? Yeah, I said quietly. I'll be gone for 3 days. Good. Let her think you're out of the picture. If there's something going on, we'll know. The night before my trip, Laura surprised me. She curled up next to me on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. I'm gonna miss you, she said softly. I'll miss you too, I said, wrapping an arm around her. You know I love you, right? She whispered, her voice almost breaking. Yeah, I said, my voice hollow. I love you too. But as I held her, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me everything. When I left for the airport the next morning, Laura kissed me goodbye at the door. Call me when you land, she said, smiling. I will, I promised, forcing a smile of my own. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a text from Simon. Everything's set. I'll keep you updated. I stared at the message for a long moment, my chest tightening. Whatever Simon found, or didn't find, would change everything. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the truth. I sat in the hotel lobby in Denver, sipping a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The meetings were over for the day, but I couldn't focus on anything other than the phone in my hand. Every time it buzzed, my heart leapt to my throat. I kept checking for updates from Simon, half hoping there'd be nothing to report. When the text finally came, my stomach dropped. She's at Derek's party. Been there about an hour. Everything looks normal so far, just mingling. I stared at the message, rereading it several times. Normal. What did that even mean? I could picture her there, moving through the crowd with her easy smile, charming everyone in the room. The thought made my chest tighten. Keep me posted, I replied, my hands trembling as I set the phone down on the table. But I couldn't just sit there. The waiting was unbearable. I left the lobby, wandering the streets near my hotel, trying to clear my head. The city lights blurred as I walked, my thoughts spinning in endless circles. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Simon that made my heart stop. "Call me when you're up. We need to talk." My hands shook as I dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring. "Simon," I said, my voice tight. "What's going on?" "She stayed the night," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Her car's still at Derek's place." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean, she stayed the night?" "I mean, her car hasn't moved since she arrived at the party," Simon said. "I've been monitoring it all night." My breath came in shallow gasps. "Did you see anything? Was she with him?" "I didn't see anything explicit," Simon admitted. "But staying overnight? That's not nothing, Andrew." I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to make sense of it. "She didn't say anything about staying late," I muttered. "She told me she was just helping out." Simon's voice softened. "Look, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but this is worth looking into further. Do you want me to keep digging?" I closed my eyes, my stomach churning. "Yeah, keep watching. Let me know if anything changes." The rest of the day passed in a blur. I sat through meeting after meeting, nodding along and pretending to pay attention while my mind was 1,000 miles away. Every time I thought about Laura, my chest tightened. I couldn't stop picturing her at Derek's place, laughing at his jokes, leaning too close. By the time I got back to my hotel room that evening, I was exhausted, but not from work. I checked my email, and there it was, an update from Simon. The subject line was simple: photos. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were 2 images. The first showed Laura sitting on a couch, a drink in her hand, smiling at something Derek had said. He was sitting next to her, his body angled toward hers. The second photo was worse. Her hand was resting on his leg, her smile bright and carefree in a way I hadn't seen in months. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. This wasn't just paranoia. This wasn't me overthinking. This was real. Simon's message at the bottom was short. "Do you want me to gather more evidence?" I couldn't bring myself to respond. That night, I called Laura. I had to hear her voice, even if I wasn't sure I could trust it. "Hey," she answered, her tone light and cheerful. "How's Denver?" "It's fine," I said, pacing the length of my hotel room. "How about you? What you been up to?" "Oh, not much," she said casually. "Just work and stuff. Same old." "Yeah," I said, my voice tightening. "Nothing interesting?" There was a pause, just a fraction of a second, but I caught it. "Nope," she said quickly. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," I lied. She laughed, that same warm, familiar laugh that used to feel like home. "You're being weird. You know that?" "I guess I just miss you," I said, forcing the words out. "I miss you too," she said softly. "Can't wait for you to come home." "Me neither," I said, though my chest felt like it was caving in. When we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in my hand. She'd lied, straight to my face. The next day, Simon called again. "She left Derek's place," he said. "And?" "She wasn't alone," Simon said. My grip on the phone tightened. "Who was with her?" "Derek," Simon said. "He walked her to her car. They hugged before she got in. It looked intimate." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "Do you have photos?" "I'll send them now," Simon said. When the photos arrived, I stared at them for what felt like forever. Laura leaning against her car, Derek standing close, his hand on her arm. The way they looked at each other, it wasn't friendly. It wasn't innocent. And then the hug. Long, close, his hands resting on her lower back like he had every right to touch her that way. My chest burned with a mix of anger, betrayal, and grief. That night, I sat in the dark, staring out at the Denver skyline. My mind replayed the photos over and over. I thought about the first time I met Laura, the way she'd smiled at me like I was the only person in the room. I thought about our wedding day, the promises we made, the life we built together. And now, it all felt like a cruel joke. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to call her and demand answers. But instead, I just sat there, silent, as tears ran down my face. Coming back to Boston should have felt like relief, like I'd finally escaped the suffocating whirlwind of my own thoughts. But the moment I walked through the door, I realized it wasn't the city or the hotel that had been weighing me down. It was everything that came with being home. Laura wasn't there. Her car wasn't in the driveway. The house felt empty. It wasn't just her absence. It was the silence, the stillness that made the walls feel like they were closing in. I dropped my bag in the hallway and stood there for a long moment, staring into the living room. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. She texted later. Running errands. Be home soon. Love you. I stared at the message. Love you. 2 words that used to feel like a warm blanket on a cold day. Now, they felt rehearsed, hollow. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the email Simon had sent me the day before. The photos stared back at me. There she was, sitting on Derek's couch, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. Her hand on his leg, his body angled toward hers in a way that made my stomach churn. I didn't need context. I didn't need an explanation. The images spoke louder than words ever could. I forwarded them to Claire with a short message. We need to talk. Urgent. By the time Laura got home, I'd already run through the conversation 100 times in my head, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment she walked through the door. Hey, she said casually, balancing a grocery bag in one hand while holding her purse in the other. You're back early. How was Denver? Her voice was light, almost cheerful, and it made my skin crawl. It was fine, I said, my tone flat. She set the bag on the counter and glanced at me. You okay? You look tired. I'm fine, I said. How was your week? She hesitated, just for a moment. Good. Busy. You know how it is. My jaw tightened. Anything interesting happen? She turned back to unpack the groceries, not meeting my eyes. Not really. Just work and errands. The usual. Lie. What about Derek's party? I asked, my voice sharp enough to cut through the air. Her hands froze. Slowly, she turned to face me, a forced smile on her lips. What about it? You told me you stayed home that night, I said, standing now. But you didn't. You were there. And you didn't just stay for the party, Laura. You stayed the night. Her face went pale. Andrew, I can explain. Don't, I snapped, my voice cracking under the weight of my anger. Don't lie to me. Not again. She stared at me, her lips trembling, but no words came out. I hired someone, I said, my breath shaky. A private investigator. He followed you. He saw everything. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, like I just hit her. You hired someone to spy on me? What else was I supposed to do? I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. You've been lying to me for weeks, Laura. You've been distant, sneaking around. What was I supposed to think? Tears filled her eyes, and her voice cracked when she spoke. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, I demanded, my voice shaking with both anger and desperation. Because I've got photos, Laura. I've got proof. So, unless you've got some miraculous explanation, I'm done listening to your lies. She broke then, her shoulders slumping as the tears spilled over. It was one night, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to happen. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. My legs felt weak, and I had to steady myself against the back of the couch. So, it did happen, I said, my voice hollow. She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I was drunk, Andrew. I wasn't thinking. It didn't mean anything. I let out a bitter laugh, the kind that hurts more than it relieves. It didn't mean anything? Are you serious? You cheated on me, and you're telling me it didn't mean anything? I know I messed up, she sobbed. I know I hurt you, but I love you. I still love you. You don't get to say that, I said, my voice rising again. You don't get to cheat on me, and then turn around and say you love me. That's not how this works. She reached for me, her hands shaking. Please, Andrew, don't do this. Don't throw everything away. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. I'll do whatever it takes. I stepped back, out of her reach. You already threw everything away, I said, my voice cold. You made that choice when you let him touch you, when you stayed at his place. You don't just come back from that, Laura. Her sobs filled the room, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the photos, the lies, and the hollow way she'd said, "love you," in her texts. "I need time," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "I need to think." She nodded, wiping her face with trembling hands. "Okay, take all the time you need. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I didn't respond. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there, crying. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring as I sped through the streets. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. Her tears, her excuses, the way she said it didn't mean anything. By the time I stopped, I realized I'd driven to the waterfront. The waves lapped against the shore, calm and unbothered by the chaos in my head. I sat there in the car, staring out at the water, and let the tears come. Not the quiet, dignified kind you see in movies. These were raw, ugly sobs that racked my whole body. I cried for the woman I thought I knew, for the life we'd built together, for the future I thought we'd have. And I cried for the man I used to be, the man who trusted her completely, without question. That man was gone. When I finally got home, the house was dark. Laura was already in bed. Or maybe she wasn't. I didn't check. I couldn't face her again. Not yet. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my wedding ring. The weight of it felt unbearable. I pulled it off and set it on the table, watching as it caught the faint glow of the moonlight streaming through the window. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt certain about one thing. There was no going back. The morning sunlight crept through the blinds, but instead of warmth, it felt like an intrusion. I hadn't slept. How could I? My mind replayed every word Laura said the night before, every tear that fell, and every excuse she gave. I made my way downstairs, trying not to make a sound. The house felt different, heavy, oppressive. It wasn't the silence I used to enjoy, the kind that came with comfort and familiarity. This was the kind of silence that made my chest ache. Laura was sitting at the kitchen table, gripping a mug of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Her hair was pulled back messily, her face pale and blotchy from crying. When she saw me, she tried to manage a weak smile. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice breaking a little at the edges. I didn't answer right away. I went straight to the coffee maker, poured myself a cup, and leaned against the counter, staring at the floor. "Andrew," she started after a long pause, "we need to talk." I sighed, shaking my head. "What's left to talk about, Laura? You said everything last night." Her hands trembled as she set the mug down. "I know I did, but I need you to know how sorry I am." Stop, I interrupted, my voice firmer than I intended. "Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo what you did." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she kept her gaze locked on mine. "I know," she whispered. "I know I hurt you, but I love you, Andrew. I love you, and I'm begging you to give me a chance to make this right." I let out a bitter laugh and set my coffee on the counter, turning to face her fully. "You love me? You love me, but you slept with him. You love me, but you lied to me, over and over again. How am I supposed to believe anything you say?" "I don't expect you to believe me right now," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's the truth. What happened? It was a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. But it doesn't change how I feel about you." I shook my head, my anger flaring again. "It doesn't change how you feel? Do you even hear yourself? Laura, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed us. You destroyed everything we built." Her tears fell freely now, her shoulders shaking. "I know," she choked out, "but I'm begging you, please don't give up on us. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll quit my job. I'll never talk to him again. I'll do whatever it takes." I stared at her, trying to find even a sliver of the woman I married. But all I saw was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had lied to me, betrayed me, and now expected me to just forget. "I can't do this," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't look at you without seeing him, without seeing the lies. I don't know who you are anymore." Her sobs filled the room, but I stayed where I was, rooted to the floor. A part of me wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but I couldn't. Not anymore. I'm going to see Claire, I said, breaking the silence. I've already started the process. Her head snapped up, her face pale. What do you mean, the process? I'm filing for divorce, Laura. The words hung in the air like a blade. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, Andrew, please don't do this. Please. I'll change. I'll do anything. Just don't give up on us. Her desperation was painful to watch, but it didn't change the truth. You gave up on us the moment you let him into our marriage, I said coldly. She collapsed into the chair, her sobs racking her body. I'm so sorry, she whispered over and over, like it was a mantra that could fix everything. I'll be staying at a hotel for a few days, I said, grabbing my keys. You'll hear from my lawyer soon. I didn't wait for her response. I walked out, leaving her crying at the table. Claire's office felt colder this time. Or maybe it was just me. I sat across from her, my hands gripping the edges of the chair as I told her everything. You're certain about this? She asked gently. I nodded, though it felt like there was a weight on my chest. There's no way back from this. I can't live like this. She nodded in understanding. I'll start drafting the paperwork. Given what you've told me, this should be a straightforward process. No children, no shared property. And with the evidence, we have a strong position. Her words felt clinical, detached, and yet I clung to them. They gave me a direction, a path forward, even if it wasn't one I wanted to take. How long will it take? I asked, my voice hoarse. Typically a few months, she said, but we'll move as quickly as possible. I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak. The first night in the hotel was hell. The room felt sterile, empty. I stared at the ceiling for hours, unable to shake the weight pressing down on me. At one point, I pulled out my phone and stared at Laura's number. My finger hovered over the call button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. What would I even say? Instead, I called Simon. Hey, I said when he picked up. I just wanted to say thanks. For everything. There was a pause. How are you holding up? He asked, his tone careful. I'm not, I admitted, my voice cracking, but I filed for divorce today. It's over. I'm sorry, Andrew, Simon said softly. I know this isn't what you wanted. No, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat, but it's what needed to happen. Over the next few days, I buried myself in work. I went to meetings, answered emails, and pretended like everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Every night, I came back to the hotel room, and the emptiness hit me all over again. Laura tried to call. Her texts piled up, each one more desperate than the last. Please, Andrew, let's talk. I love you. I miss you. Don't give up on us. I read them, over and over, but I never replied. Every time I thought about forgiving her, the images of her with Derek flashed in my mind, and the pain came rushing back. One night, I sat at the small hotel desk, staring at my wedding ring. I hadn't worn it since I left. It sat there, catching the dim light of the lamp, like a reminder of everything I'd lost. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers. It felt heavier than it should have, like it was carrying the weight of every promise we'd made to each other. Promises she'd broken. I set it down and leaned back in the chair, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in days, I let myself cry. Not for her, but for me. I cried for the life I thought we had, for the trust I'd lost, and for the man I used to be. And when the tears finally stopped, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. It's strange how quickly life can feel like it's unraveling, yet at the same time, days keep passing. The sun rises, the world spins, and people go on with their lives. But when you're in the middle of it, when everything you thought you could rely on has crumbled, it feels like time stops, even as everything around you keeps moving. The hotel room became my limbo. Each day I left for work, pretending I had it all together, and each night I returned to sit in silence, staring at the wedding ring I couldn't bring myself to throw away. It was like a relic from another life, one I wasn't part of anymore. Laura kept calling. I'd see her name flash on my phone, and every time, it sent a wave of guilt, anger, and sadness through me. I couldn't pick up. I couldn't hear her voice. I wasn't ready to face the broken pieces of us. About a week later, Claire called with an update. "We've filed the paperwork," she said. "Laura will be served in the next few days." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I'd been waiting for them. This was what I wanted, what I needed. So why did it feel like I was suffocating? "Thanks," I managed to say, my voice rough. "Andrew," Claire said, her tone softening. "I know this is hard, but you're doing the right thing. It's okay to feel conflicted. It's okay to grieve what you've lost." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I know. It's a lot." "It is," she said, "but you'll get through it. And if you need someone to talk to, don't hesitate to reach out." "Thanks, Claire," I said again, though the lump in my throat made it hard to get the words out. The day Laura was served, she called me. "For the first time in weeks," I answered. "Andrew," she said, her voice shaking, "I got the papers." "I know," I said quietly. There was a long pause, and I could hear her trying to hold back tears. "Is this really what you want?" "It's what I need," I said, the words feeling like knives in my chest. She sniffled. "I've been trying to give you space, but I don't know what else to do. I love you, Andrew. I'll always love you." I closed my eyes, letting out a shaky breath. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." Her sobs came through the phone, and for a moment, I almost broke. But then I remembered the photos, the lies, and the sleepless nights I'd spent wondering if I'd ever be able to trust her again. "I can't do this anymore, Laura," I said, my voice breaking. "I can't keep pretending we can fix something that's already broken." "We're not broken," she pleaded. "We're just hurt. We can heal, Andrew. Please, let me prove it to you." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "It's too late, Laura. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't listen anymore. "Take care of yourself," I said quietly before hanging up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of relief. It was over. In the weeks that followed, I started to find pieces of myself again. I went to the gym, something I hadn't done in years. I started running, letting the steady rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement drown out my thoughts. I picked up my old guitar, my fingers clumsy but determined as I tried to remember the songs I used to play. It wasn't much, but it was something. Rose, one of my coworkers, noticed the change. "You're looking better these days," she said one afternoon, her smile warm. "Trying to keep busy," I replied with a small shrug. "Well, it's working," she said. "We're going out for drinks after work. You should come." For a moment, I hesitated. The thought of being around people, of pretending everything was fine, felt exhausting. But then I realized that maybe that's what I needed, to be around people who didn't know the weight I was carrying. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I'll join you." At the bar, I found myself laughing for the first time in weeks. It wasn't forced or hollow. It was real. Rose cracked a joke about our boss, and for a moment, I forgot about the mess waiting for me back at the hotel. As the night went on, she leaned in closer, her voice soft. "I know you've been going through a lot," she said, "but you're doing better than you think. You're stronger than you realize." Her words caught me off guard, and I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded, offering a small smile. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. The paperwork arrived in the mail, along with a letter from Claire. "Congratulations on the next chapter of your life," it read. I stared at the letter for a long time, the words blurring together. The relief I expected didn't come. Instead, there was just emptiness. I folded the letter and set it aside, grabbing my jacket and heading out the door. That evening, I stood at the waterfront, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The waves crashed gently against the shore, their rhythm steady and unchanging. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding ring. It felt heavy in my hand, like it was carrying all the weight of the past. For a long time, I just stood there, turning it over in my fingers. And then, with a deep breath, I let it go. The ring hit the water with a small splash, disappearing beneath the surface. It wasn't closure. It wasn't some magical moment of healing, but it was a start. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Rose. "Drinks this weekend?" My treat. I smiled for the first time that day. Sure, I replied. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for now, that was enough.